If every time you diet you feel smaller, weaker and flatter, then this video is for you. Building muscle is hard, like really hard, especially if you're training naturally. It can take weeks, months, even years to see a noticeable difference, which is exactly why so many guys hate dieting, because every time they start losing body fat, they feel like they're losing all the muscle they worked so hard to build. And honestly, sometimes they are. The problem is most people blame the calorie deficit, when in reality, it's usually how they've set the diet and training up, not the actual diet itself. Because yes, whether you diet slowly or aggressively, the studies do show that the more aggressive your diet is, the greater chance of losing more muscle mass. And in some cases, still actually build muscle mass when dieting. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through my 7-step checklist to help you keep your strength, retain your muscle mass, and make sure your next fat loss phase actually improves your physique, not ruins it. Step 1, sleep at least 7 hours each night. Sleep matters more than most people realise. When your sleep is poor, hunger goes up, cravings increase, recovery gets worse, and training performance dips. This makes it harder to hold on to muscle mass when dieting, especially in larger deficits. And if you're constantly tired, under-recovered and hungry, you're going to make dieting much harder than it needs to be. Sleep is the foundation, and if you can be getting at least 7 hours each night, it's going to make dieting and training much more manageable. Step 2, lift weights at least 3 times per week. If you want to keep and potentially build new muscle mass, the frequency recommendations across multiple studies show us that we need to be training each muscle group at least twice per week. And trying to cram all your volume into 1 or 2 sessions is probably going to reduce your training quality and also make your sessions really long, which is why I would recommend you want to be training at least 3 times per week and making sure that you're hitting each muscle group at least twice over the week. Step 3, progressive overload. There is no reason you should be getting weaker when dieting. You might feel a little bit more fatigued, you might need to rest longer between each set, and that's normal, but you should still be trying to progress on a week-to-week basis, whether that's more reps, more load, better technique. There are multiple different ways to apply progressive overload to your training, but you should still be training hard and close to failure. Ideally around 1 to 3 reps in reserve, depending upon the exercise and the rep scheme that you're using. Step 4, set the right calorie deficit. Your rate of weight loss matters. I'd recommend losing somewhere between 0.5 to 1% of your body weight on a weekly basis. Now, where you sit in that range depends upon your goal. If you've just finished a long gaining phase or bulk, I'd usually go slower and more towards 0.5% of body weight each week, because you don't want to risk losing any muscle mass that you've just worked so hard to build in that gaining phase. However, if you're dieting for the first time or you're planning on doing a bulk or a gaining phase afterwards, you can probably be a little bit more aggressive, because hopefully the idea is to either get the weight off nice and fast so you can do a really long gaining phase, or if you're new to the gym, it's going to be a lot easier for you to actually build muscle mass as opposed to being a more experienced lifter. Step 5, eat a high protein diet. I would recommend aiming for somewhere between 1.7 to 2.35 grams per kilo in body weight. The more aggressive your deficit though, the higher I would go on that range. For example, last year I did an aggressive fat loss phase and lost 7 kilos in 7 weeks, meaning I was in a 1,000 calorie deficit per day. Therefore, I was aiming for 2.35 grams per kilo in body weight of protein to try and help offset some of the muscle mass that could be lost in this diet. But now I'm currently dieting again and I'm in an 8-week fat loss phase, but it's much slower and steadier. And the reason for that is the last 9 months I've just spent doing a gaining phase. So this time around I don't have as much fat to lose, but I also don't want to increase the risk of me losing any muscle mass. So therefore I'm aiming to lose around 0.5% of body weight on a weekly basis. So this time I'm aiming for somewhere between 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilo in body weight in protein. But I'd always recommend as a minimum baseline that you're aiming for at least 1.7 grams per kilo in body weight. Step 6, take creatine. Don't stop taking creatine when you diet. In fact, it becomes even more important. Creatine has consistently shown to improve strength and muscle gain over the long term. And when you're dieting, we want to take every advantage we can get. I would recommend taking at least 5 grams of creatine each day, but not just when you're dieting, you should be taking it all year round. Bonus step, carbohydrate and fat intake. Now this one isn't necessary, but I'm going to explain why I've included it. If you want to finish your diet looking fuller and feeling better, then having a higher carbohydrate intake compared to fat will help. I'd aim for at least 15 to 20% of your total calorie intake to be from fats, and then the rest carbohydrates. And the reason for this is because your muscles store glycogen and water. So when carbs get too low, that's why people can often look flatter. Not necessarily smaller, just flatter. However, this step, I just want to clarify, isn't always necessary. And most of my diets, I prefer to just set a calorie, protein and fiber target and just flip-flop between carbohydrates and fats. And the reason for that is to allow me to have more flexibility within my diet. So some days I can have more carbs if I feel like it, or some days I can have a higher fat content. But it can make a big difference visually. So if this is something you're concerned with, then I'd still look to include a high number of carbohydrates within your diet. So to quickly summarize, if you want to keep your muscle when dieting, sleep at least 7 hours, keep lifting weights and training hard, apply progressive overload, set the right calorie deficit, keep protein high, continue taking creatine, and make sure your carbs and fats are set up properly. Because losing body fat shouldn't mean losing all the muscle that you've worked so hard to build. Most guys don't lose muscle mass because dieting doesn't work. They lose it because their training and nutrition setup is poor. If you fix that, dieting becomes a completely different process. Now, if you're currently in that awkward stage where you're not sure whether you should be focusing on dieting to lose body fat or whether you should be focusing on building muscle first, I've created a free quiz to help you decide. It takes into account your body fat percentage, training age, and a few other factors to help you work out whether you should be focusing on a cut, bulk, or recomp. It takes less than 60 seconds to complete, and I'll leave a link in the description and also pin it to the top comment of this video. And if you want a full video breakdown on how to decide whether you should bulk, cut, or recomp, I've also recorded a video on that, so I'll leave that on this end screen somewhere for you to watch next, because getting that decision right first makes everything else so much easier. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.